And it's good to be back. It's good to be back here doing this, preaching. Paul said, man, woe to me if I don't. And for me, I was made to share the word of God. And so it is so good, even just having 2 weeks from preaching, like it throws off the weekly rhythm. And so it is good to be back sharing the word of God together with you today. And I am so glad that you are here with us. We enjoyed our vacation. The last 2 weeks we had guest speakers, and it was awesome. We had Reverend Asa Kane 2 weeks ago, and then last week Reverend Dennis Rivera just bringing the word. We are blessed to have had that opportunity, and I am thankful for an opportunity to take a vacation, to decompress. Don't worry, I am fully recompressed. So sometimes you take a vacation, then you need a vacation after the vacation. Does anybody know about that? Yeah, I didn't. I was really good with the vacation this last week, getting back in. It was real quick. We were able to get right back on the horse, and so it is good to be back. There were a couple of things that happened when we were on vacation that I just think were very, interesting. They were notable. That's what I'll say. They were notable. And part of that has to do with the rhythm change that Liz and I experienced several years ago. In 2021, right around there, I handed off some of the responsibilities that previously I would do throughout the week. We had some kind of changes in our schedules, and it used to be that I would do all the grocery shopping on Fridays. And then right in 2021, we shifted that, and Liz took that over. But so for about a year, I had not gone grocery shopping at all, a full year. And then in vacation last year, 2022, we are the type of people where we'll go to an Airbnb, make sure it has a kitchen, and then instead of going out to eat all the time, we will, go get groceries and stuff. And so on vacation, a year after stopping doing grocery shopping, I went back with the family together to do the grocery shopping. So after a year. And then I did no more grocery shopping for the last year until we went on vacation again, and we had a similar experience where we went grocery shopping together. And so it was a totally unintentional experiment. And it was really interesting to see just how much of a difference there was with the stickers underneath the stuff we were buying in a year. Right? Anybody else experiencing sticker shock at the moment? Yeah. Now you understand why your parents used to say stuff like, I remember when. Because that's kind of what I was experiencing. And I can remember viscerally, I can visualize the moment a year ago in 2022 where after not having been grocery shopping since the last presidential election, totally mentioned coincidentally, and having not gone grocery shopping for a full year, I can remember in 2022, that summer, when I was standing in the ketchup aisle, and I was looking at a bottle of ketchup that was over $5, and I was shocked to my core that ketchup could be so expensive. And so then another year goes by, and I go back grocery shopping for the first time in a year. This is why this is an interesting experience. And this time, it was when we were in the chip aisle. And a bag of chips that I remember being $2, maybe between $2 and $3, was over $6. And it was just like this, suck in the gut. And for us, we budget every single week. We're like envelope type people. And so we put $125 a week in groceries. And some people are like, how do you do groceries for $125 a week? And some of you are like, you spend $125? Both ends of the spectrum, right? But for us, it's $125. We try to stay as close as we can to that. And $125 used to fill up a whole lot more of the cart than it does now. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. You're there. You're with me. And so it's a unique experience. And then the other thing that kind of happened, similar kind of vein, was when I have not had sugar since February of this year. Okay, so it was early February, hadn't eaten. I mean, I'm sure there's sugar in everything, but like processed cookies, ice cream, treats, desserts. Like, my desserts have been pathetic. An apple is dessert. What is that? But anyways, so for my birthday, which was on vacation, we decided this is the time. You know, one time a year, something special. So we decided to get ice cream for the first time since February. So we went to Andy's. And it has been a long time since we went to Andy's and got ice cream for the whole family. We pull up to the window, and it's $40 for 4 ice creams. Now, I'm not sure if this is true, but I feel like ice cream for the 4 of us used to be $12. But now it's $40. And I got a little root beer, too, because I was splurging, right? So this was like, and that was like, oh. And as I'm driving away, eating my ice cream, which tastes a little more bitter than I hoped it would, there was also this like thing I was thinking about, chewing on, I guess, besides the ice cream. It was the idea that maybe that's okay a little bit. It's okay for me to not just, because we've been so used to being able to do whatever we want, you know, to go and get ice cream whenever we want because it was so cheap. And maybe it's okay to not be able to just go and buy ice cream and or go out to eat on a regular basis. Maybe it's okay to have a little bit of a limit on what we can actually afford to do on a regular basis. Maybe not. I don't know. But I was thinking about that at least a little bit. So that was our vacation, and it was good, and it's good to be back. And we took a vacation not just personally, but we took a vacation as a church from the series that we were working through called Stories for the Summer, where we've just been reading stories of extraordinary women. Not all of the extraordinary women in the Bible. We just don't have time for that. Not even a few of the really big ones. We wouldn't have time to cover Esther or Ruth or Deborah. Just extraordinary women that you find in just ordinary places. And today we're going to read the story of when Jesus went on vacation, which you can find in Mark chapter 7. When Jesus goes on vacation in Mark chapter 7. I'm convinced there are 2 different types of people in this world, and it is the type of people, vacation-wise, who love to go to the beach and just want to sit on the sand and maybe go swimming in the water. That's like when they think of their ideal vacation, that's what they think of, beach people. Yeah, okay? And then there are people who are wise and who know that there are sharks in their water. And for them, vacation is anything but the beach. Like, you can go to the mountains, you can go hiking, you can go to a museum, you can go to a city, you can hang out in Branson, like anything but the beach. So how many of you are beach people? Okay? And how many of you are smarter than that? No, are not beach, anything but the beach people. Okay? All right, so there's the beach people, not beach people. Beach people, not beach people. Okay, cool. So we're not beach people. I don't know if you could pick that up. It was real subtle. But we are not beach people. But this is the day when God goes to the beach. Okay? Because Jesus' vast majority of his ministry happened just beside the Sea of Galilee. And what the story we're reading today is not there. He leaves Galilee, heads north along the valley, hangs a left, and goes west towards Tyre and Sidon. We don't know if he actually goes to the beach, but he hangs out in that general area, the area of Tyre, Sidon. We think he probably went this way because we know when he goes back, he heads back east over to Mount Hermon area and then heads south in that same valley before going to the Decapolis, which is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And so this story takes place right in between what is Tyre and Sidon. We're not exactly sure where, but it, in general, is an absolutely beautiful area. It's incredibly affluent if you were to go today. It's right on the Mediterranean Sea. When we went to Israel, just last, I guess in January, it wasn't that long ago, when we went to Israel, I remember we flew in and we got in when it was so dark you couldn't see. But then we went to our hotel, and our hotel was just, first night hotel was just this beautiful location right on the Mediterranean Sea, and you could see the sea from your balcony, right? And so that's where we were at. I didn't see it before, but then I could hear it. And it was relaxing sounding, and I thought, okay, I can understand why some people are beach people, right? But then the next morning, I woke up 4:30 in the morning, and I stepped out on that balcony, and I looked out toward the west, toward the Mediterranean Sea, and I grabbed my phone, and I snapped the photo. This is that photo. And it was just so peaceful. And the water is still-ish, and the moon was reflecting off that water. And I thought, oh, man, yeah, I can understand beach people. I was sitting there, and I was reflecting on the fact that and it was south of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon is now in the modern-day Lebanon, but this is very much the image that you can think of when you think of Tyre and Sidon. They are right on the coast, important port cities, and they were wealthy. They had it good. Tyre's not talked about well in Scripture. It's kind of referred to, in fact, pretty negatively. Some of maybe the most negative language about a city is used of Tyre in Ezekiel chapter 28. The city of Tyre is used as an image of Satan. When Satan was struck down from the heights, that passage is originally about Tyre, was written by Ezekiel about Tyre. It was the city that said, I will rise up and sit in the seat of God, and then was struck down as a result. So it's compared to Satan. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus even says, that the judgment that will be on Tyre and Sidon, which everybody just knows, it's going to be bad, right? He said, well, actually, the people who hear the good news and do not respond to it, these cities that I've spent all my time in, Bethsaida and Chorazin and Capernaum, these cities will be the cities where the judgment is even worse than Tyre and Sidon. So these places aren't referred to particularly well, but they are pretty wealthy. And this is the area where Jesus heads off to, and it seems like, at first glance, he is going there in order to have some sort of a vacation. It's a pretty good distance from where he was to where he's going. And from there and then on his way back, it's somewhere about 120 to 150 miles. So it's like the walk, if we were to walk from here to Fayetteville. So if you were to walk to Fayetteville. So this might have taken him weeks, might have taken him months, we don't know. But it's a long journey. And so off he goes to the region of Tyre and Sidon. In Mark chapter 7, verse 24, here's what it says. And from there he arose. And there is the west side of the Sea of Galilee. If you look just before this, in Mark chapter 6, he had just multiplied the bread. And starting with just 5 loaves and 2 fishes, had multiplied that to the point where it says that there were 12 basketfuls of bread left over. But really, for Jesus, it seems as at least for the last 2 chapters, Jesus has been, really even since John the Baptist was killed, has been trying to get away to desolate places. And he would go and people would show up. And that's actually where the story of him multiplying the bread for the Jewish people happens in Mark chapter 6. And so he had just done that. That's in that area on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. And then he heads north and then heads west over to Tyre and Sidon. So when we hear Tyre and Sidon, we don't really know what that means. Well, that's what that means. So, and from there he arose and he went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So probably not in the city themselves, but in that area in between the 2 cities or in that region of those 2 cities. It says, he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. So he wants to just, it seems, get away. Like he goes into this and he doesn't want a ton of people showing up at the house. But the problem is, it says, Jesus could not be hidden. which is a great sermon in and of itself, right? Like, you can't hide Jesus. You might try, but you can't. It kind of leaks out. The way you respond to people, the way you talk to people. People know. Even if you try to hide him, you shouldn't, because you can't. People will know. At least they better. You can't hide Jesus. That's not the sermon, but I think it could be. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. Verse 25. But immediately. So he's not there for a week. He's not even there for a few days. Immediately. Somebody sees him. Somehow somebody mentions something to somebody. Immediately, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. So this woman has a daughter. It says she's a little daughter. Now, we don't know what that means. It might be like a little daughter, or it might be, for every mom, your daughter's always your little girl, Every son is your little boy forever. Anybody? You know what I'm talking about? So maybe she is little, maybe we don't know. But it does say that her little daughter has some sort of demonic oppression, demonic possession. Like, this is real stuff. In the West, we are pretty full of ourselves. And we don't think this stuff is real. But it's real. And no matter how long we think this stuff isn't real, sooner or later you will be confronted with it. This is real stuff. And so she has some sort of demonic oppression, an unclean spirit. Matthew talks about this as well. It's really interesting because Matthew highlights a few other things. In Matthew chapter 15, when he tells this story, he actually says, "Behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying." So Jesus is, remember, in the house. He's trying to hide away. And immediately this woman shows up. She is not showing up inside the house to begin with. So she is standing outside the house while Jesus is inside the house. And it says she is crying out, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." She is crying out, "Have mercy on me, Son of David." That's the same language that Bartimaeus uses. Right? And Jesus heals him. 2 other blind men use that same language. "Have mercy on me, Son of David." And Jesus responds to it and does what the people are asking. But here is this woman standing outside of the house crying out when Jesus is trying to, it says, not let everybody know what's going on. So he's inside the house. He's trying to hide away, but you can't hide Jesus. This woman shows up. She's standing outside. She's crying out in a loud voice. What do you think is going to start happening? It's going to draw a crowd, right? Like, others are going to start showing up as well. And so she's crying out. The disciples get upset here in a moment, but you can see verse 23. Before that happens, it says, "But he did not answer her a word." Which has got to be the worst, right? When we're crying out to God and saying, "God, just have mercy, have mercy, have mercy." And there is no response. I think it is better to get a response of no than to get no response. Because if you get a response of no, then you know. It's just time. Move on. Do something else. Go a different direction. Pray for a different thing. But when there's no response, there's still that hope and expectation, and you're trying, but there's no response at all. That's the situation for her. And some of us know exactly what that's like. I've prayed prayers like this and had no response before. So I know kind of what this woman is going through, but I don't think there's any prayer prayed like this but the prayer of a mother for a daughter or for a son. I don't know that anybody knows quite what this prayer is like except for somebody who has prayed a prayer like it for a child, for deliverance or salvation or healing or whatever. So she's crying out, and he's not even responding at all. He's hanging out inside the house, doesn't say a thing. And his disciples come and beg him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." Okay, so they're in the house. They're like, Jesus, call 911 or tell somebody or do something. Tell this woman to leave, right? But then at that point, according to Mark, it seems like she's let in because now she's not outside the house crying out, "Have mercy on me." Now she's inside the house at his feet. Go back to Mark chapter 7. That's what it says happens. Immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile. The word Gentile there is it's translated from the literal Greek. She was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth. So she's from that area. That whole area was Syria. It's also region specifically Phoenicia. So Syria, Phoenicia, Syria-Phoenician, Syrio-Phoenician, Syro-Phoenician. That's how they come up with that. So she's a Greek. She's a Greek. She's a Gentile. She's not Jewish, is what's important here. She is not Jewish. And so she comes and falls at his feet, and she begs him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Okay, how many know the story already? So raise your hand. Come on. How many of you were like, "Wait, what?" That's not the Jesus with the kind eyes, right? Like, that's not the Jesus that you expect from The Chosen, right? Like, this is the Jesus when you're like, "Ooh, Jesus, seriously, dude." Like, what would Mary have said if Mary was in the room? I think she would have reached over and smacked Jesus upside the head, or like given him some soap to wash his mouth out with or something. Like, no mom lets her son talk to another woman about like her child in this way. And it's harsh and it's hard. And actually, for the longest time when I would read this story, I would try to soften it. Like, I came up with all kinds of stuff. Like, maybe Jesus had a smile when he said it so that she knew he was kind of joking, or maybe he had a twinkle in his eyes. But I don't think that that's what at all we should read into it. It's a hard statement. It is offensive, right? So we need to let that offense rest on our hearts. Like, we need to just sit with that for a moment. This is a hard thing that Jesus says to them. The Tyrians and the Galileans specifically, but the Jewish people did not like each other. They didn't like each other. The Jewish people definitely didn't like the Tyrians. The Tyrians did not particularly like the Jewish people either. What's really interesting is in Acts chapter 12, it says that Tyre relied on the bread that was provided, the grains, all the food that was provided by Galilee. And that Herod would buy it up and sell it to Tyre, because Tyre is not the bread basket, right? The bread basket is Galilee, and so it's just off to the northwest. So they would buy their food, and they relied on it. That's what it says in Acts chapter 12. Well, a lot of times Galilee didn't have enough food, and Tyre is eating it. And so besides the fact that it's a Gentile, they didn't like each other, right? This is not, but here he comes to her neck of the woods, and he calls her a dog. The metaphor is either her or her child is a dog, while the Jewish people are the children. And he says, "Man, I can't take what belongs to the children and give it to the dogs." Like, that's harsh, and you feel that, and that hurts a little bit when I read that. And yet that's exactly what Jesus says to her. After she's crying out, after she falls at his feet and says, "Help my daughter," she is oppressed by a demonic spirit, by an unclean spirit. And Jesus says, "It's not right for me to take what belongs to the children and give it to the dogs." And I wonder if it just sat for a moment. Because I would imagine if I were in the room and I heard Jesus say that, I would be super quiet. Just waiting for the situation to resolve. You know what I'm saying? Like, "Okay, Jesus, you said it. Now you better figure out what you're going to say next. Like, I'm not going to try to fill in this gap for you. Like, this is something you got to work yourself out of," right? Like, if I were in the room in this moment, I probably would not have known what to say. And so I would imagine there was a gap there. You don't know for sure. But she does respond. And as much as I'm surprised at what Jesus says, I am more surprised at her response to what Jesus said. She says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Is that not so good? She is the only person in the entire book of Mark to, when she is talking to Jesus, refer to him as Lord. No one else does that. She says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs get the crumbs off the table. She's the first person in the book of Mark to engage with Jesus on what his mission is and what his mission isn't on this level. It is an incredible response for her to make. And you're just kind of like, what did she know that I don't know? Like when I would be offended in that situation, what does she know that I don't? That she responds like I probably wouldn't be smart enough to respond. Like her response to him is just absolutely genius. It seems so perfect that she would respond this way. And I wonder, like, what did she understand? And then I wonder, wait a second. She had a child, and she probably just had a dog, right? Let me show you a picture of my dog. One of my two dogs. We have two dogs. One's named Ginger, and one's named Rosemary. This is Rosemary. We call her Rosie for short. Now, we have a rule in our house, and that is that when you're sitting at the table, you do not feed the dogs from the table. That rule is in place because it is super annoying when you're trying to eat and the dog is like right here, right? So there's a rule, and we are serious about that rule. We don't let our kids feed the dogs from the table. We don't feed the dogs from the table. It's just a rule in our house. Guess where this picture was taken? Yeah, at the table. Now, maybe for you, like, it seems like the emotions that your dogs have, you can understand, but maybe other people can't. I can understand the emotion in that look right there, and I don't know if you can, but there is hope and expectation and a little bit of desperation here. Because what does my dog know? She knows that in spite of the rule that you do not feed the dogs from the table, that there are times when either on purpose or by accident, food that belongs on the table makes it onto the floor. Maybe one of the children didn't like it so much and just slips it off the plate. Not that that would ever happen at our house, but if it did, this dog knows that if you just wait long enough, you might get something off the table, in spite of the rule, in spite of what it's supposed to look like. This dog knows that. And sometimes there's just crumbs on the floor. And any parent, any mom with a child knows that if you eat at the table, there's crumbs under the table. Can I get an amen? And a mom with a child with an unclean spirit, right? Like, probably going to be more crumbs than most, right? Like, is that a fair statement? The spirit's unclean? I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Totally inappropriate. Don't go home and tell your kids if there's crumbs on the floor that they have unclean spirits. That's not what I'm saying. But like, she would know about that. And I wonder if maybe that it's not she has some great revelation in this moment, but if she's just a mom who knows about dogs and crumbs under tables. And Jesus says it is not right to take the food that belongs to the children and give it to the dogs. And she says, yes, but. Yes, Lord, but. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table. And that response is mind-blowing. And so Jesus says to her, for this statement. That word statement is the word logos. For this word, for this message, for this gospel, for this good news, for this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. For this statement. And she went home, and she found the child lying in bed, and the demon gone. Then it says, Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis, the 10 cities on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. It's a Gentile area. Now, when I read this story, like at first, again, I'm kind of offended, right? Like, I'm sitting here and I'm reading it and I'm thinking, man, like that's just, I can't believe Jesus said that to her. And if you're not offended, let me tell you why you should be. You should be. And here's why. Who do you picture yourself as in this story? Because when I picture myself as one of the disciples. Maybe not like one of the big three who are like in the front and that Jesus is talking to all the time, Peter, James, John. Maybe I'm one of the ones in back. Like maybe I'm Thomas and I'm like up on my tippy toes watching over the top. And when he says it to her, I'm like, oh snap, Jesus, you did not. And he said, yes, I did. And that's me. Like I'm the disciple in back, right? No, that's not who I am. And you aren't either. Unless you are full-blooded Jewish, you know who you are? You're the Syrophoenician on the ground. We are the Gentile. We're the one who comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, it is not right for me to take what belongs to the children and give it to you, the dogs. Jesus is saying that to us. Okay, so now you can be a little offended by that. Well, Jesus. Here's the thing. If you think Jesus does not say offensive things, think again. He says things that offend all the time. He offends the Pharisees. He offends the rich young man. He offends Herod. Like, he says all kinds of offensive things. So if you're thinking Jesus is just all lovey-dovey, like, step back and actually read some of the things that Jesus says and think about what he is actually saying. It is incredibly offensive. But we're okay with him offending the Pharisees because they deserve it, right? Like, yeah, get him, Jesus. You know, we're okay with even the rich young man because he's rich. We don't like rich people. Like, get him, you know? And Herod, definitely get Herod. But like us, come on, Jesus, not us. I mean, D.L. Moody once said that Jesus never sent anyone home empty who didn't come full of themselves. Which is a pretty good line. Except this woman doesn't seem full of herself. And I would like to think that when I come to Jesus, I'm not full of myself either. And yet, Jesus very much says to this woman, I can't take what belongs to the children and give it to you, the dogs. And then her response, which nails it, he responds to. And this isn't a matter of like, it's not a matter of scarcity either. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like Jesus doesn't have power to spare. Like, it wouldn't have been that hard. You want to shut her up or get her to go? Just do what she's asking. But, and we know that it's not a matter of like Jesus doesn't have enough to get the job done. Remember, he just multiplied bread and there were 12 basketfuls left over, right? That happened in Mark chapter 6, right before this. That's like the story before this. Like, this is not that far apart from what happens there. So we know Jesus has the power to spare. And actually, it says that right after this, he does the whole multiplying the bread thing again. He does it twice. If you didn't know that, Jesus doesn't just multiply bread once. He does it twice. He does it once in Galilee for the Jewish people, and then he does it as soon as he gets to Decapolis. That's what he does for the Gentile people. Wait a second. In Mark chapter 6, Jesus has 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he multiplies it and he feeds 5,000 Jewish people. He has 12 basketfuls left over. Then he leaves. And off he goes to Tyre and to Sidon, where he interacts with one person, this woman. And then he heads back and ends up in the Decapolis. When he's there, he has 7 loaves of bread, and he multiplies it for 4,000 people. And it says there are 7 basketfuls left over. So first, he multiplies food for the Jewish people. And then off he goes to Tyre and Sidon, interacts with this one woman, and then comes back and he multiplies bread for the Gentiles. Why did Jesus go to Tyre and Sidon? Our first hypothesis was that he was going on vacation. When was the last time when you were going on vacation you thought, I'm going to walk to Fayetteville? That sounds like a restful time. And why Tyre? Why Sidon? You want to go and rest. You're not going to get an apartment on Times Square in New York City and just stay there and watch Netflix. It's not what you do there. If you want to rest, just get rid of the disciples for a little while. Like, if you weren't followed around by 12 smelly fishermen, right, others too, that are all still smelly, and they're all arguing about who's greatest in the kingdom of God, nobody will know who you are, and they'll just leave you be. They're kind of the thing that's like kicking people off. Oh, that's Jesus right there. He's followed around by 12 smelly dudes, right? Like, you know that. And like spiritual renewal, you think he's going for spiritual renewal? That would be like going to Las Vegas for spiritual renewal. Like, this isn't something that people did. If he wanted to kick back and relax, if he wanted spiritual renewal, this is not the plan. So why does he go 120 to 150 miles? He went for her. It's the only thing he could have gone for, right? Because if you read the story, verse 27, he goes there, he interacts with her, and then no one else. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." He went for her, but he went also for her statement. He went for her message that she says, but there are leftovers, aren't there, Jesus? And he says, yeah, there kind of is. And then he leaves there and he multiplies the bread for the Gentiles too. Do you see the message here? This is the day when the gospel goes to the dogs, of which you and I are one. The entire book of Mark is written to the dogs. It was written 30 years after this, written to Roman Gentiles. We are the Gentiles. It was written to us. The book of Mark is about the fact that the message of Jesus Christ goes beyond just the Jewish people to all people. See, this is the beginning. It's not the end, but it is the beginning of what will be Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. See, this is the beginning. It's not there yet, right? That won't happen until Jesus dies and is risen again. But right now you see a very glimpse of it in this one woman, right? You see a crack in the wall here. You see the beginning of that. And see, Jesus, when he says this to her, when he says, but it's not right. First, it has to go to the children. Even as you read the passage, read it again. Like when he says what he says there in Mark chapter 7, verse 27. He says, "And he said to her, 'Let the children be fed first.'" Did you see the word there that I think he hung out like laundry for her to see? The children must be fed first. That's a crack. And she sees it. She heard it. And she says, "Oh, that's wide enough for me." You see, this is the first crack in the wall Jesus came to tear down. And you and I are offended. And she says,
"So you're telling me there's a chance?"
Yeah! She sees the crack, and it's enough. It's enough for her, and it's enough for her daughter. Jesus came all this way for one statement from one woman, an extraordinary woman in an ordinary place, brings the message of the gospel to Gentiles everywhere, just in a small little glimpse. Because she knows something. She knows that if I make a loaf of bread and I tear off a piece of that and I give it to Suzanne Jenkins, who just got her doctorate from Michigan State University in food science. If I give her that little piece of bread, she brings it. Yeah. But if I give her that little piece of bread and she brings it to a laboratory, she knows not just what was in the piece of bread, she knows what was in the whole loaf. See, this woman knows that what's in the cake is in the crumb. What's in the loaf is in the leftovers. And all she needs is a little piece, and that is more than enough for her. And what is it that causes her to not be offended where you and I might easily find offense? What is it that helps her to see just a little crack in the wall and recognize I can fit there? That's big enough for me. That's big enough for my daughter. I'll just take the crumbs, Jesus. I think it's desperation. I think it is desperation. But not the type of desperation where the cart seems like it's less than it used to be. Like not the type of desperation that comes from a zero-sum game where if somebody else gets something, I don't get anything. Or if I get something, then it comes at the expense of somebody else, because that's not the way God works. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not an issue of scarcity. Jesus multiplies the loaves, and then there's plenty of leftovers, right? Like, that's not the problem here. But there is something about apathy. There is something about not caring. And there is something about the desperation and the passion of this woman in this moment that when others would be offended, she says, oh, but that's enough for me. That's all I need. And there is something about our God, I believe. I think there is something about our God that he uses a different measure. He uses a different measure based on the level of desperation. That when we are truly, truly desperate, it's like he doesn't just give a little bit. That's the point where you recognize there's not just a little bit of mercy. There are storehouses of mercy. And that there is far more than we could ever need. And that crack in the wall of that storehouse of mercy, I might think might just be just enough. That's the moment when he opens the doors and he pours it out completely on us. Which brings me to the title of the message for the day. Desperate measures. Desperate measures. Not that desperation would drive us to desperate measures, but that when we are desperate, he pours out different types of measures on us. Desperate measures. That's what the story of this extraordinary woman in an ordinary place speaks to me. And desperation is not something I'm saying we should manufacture. Certainly not. I don't want to be in a place of desperation. But I do want to know that when I am, I know, because isn't it amazing? Back up. Isn't it amazing? She is crying out outside the house, and there's no answer from the inside. And you might think, okay, well, Jesus, are you going to respond to her? He's in Tyre and Sidon for her. He left far before she ever asked him for anything. If it took him weeks to get there, he had already responded before she had even prayed. Isn't that amazing? Right? She's crying out. She's at his feet and asking desperately for something. He's already responded. The fact that he is there on that day is a response to her. Nobody else shows up at the house, at least not that we see in the story. Matthew, Mark both say, this is it. Then he goes on. Like, this is the one reason why he travels. And this is, as far as we can tell, the furthest Jesus ever travels, apart from when he goes to Egypt as a child. He comes all this way for her. She has no idea he's already responded before she's even prayed. These are the types of measures that he uses when we come to that place where we've tried everything else. We've come to the end of ourselves, the limits of what we can do on our own. And we come to him and we find that that's really all he was looking for to begin with. It's for us to come to him and say, God, I need you because I can't do it on my own and I've got no other options. And that's when he meets us with measures that we see in no other way than absolute desperation. So don't manufacture it. I'm not saying manufacture it. What I am saying is this: if you are desperately praying something for a child, if you are desperately praying for something for a family member, if you are desperately praying something for yourself, that it may be that God has already responded and you just haven't seen the answer yet, but it's coming. And maybe it'll seem like he's not responding, but he will. Because he responds with measures that you cannot comprehend when we come to him with that level of desperation. So keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking, and when you see just a little crack open up, oh man, go for it with everything you've got.